And hello again, and here we are for part 2 of my Kawasaki Z650B restoration project. So in part 1 I failed miserably to start the engine due, I think, to a problem with the points. So I've come up with a different plan, and that plan is to strip the bike down to a bare frame, get the engine out, but don't touch anything. All I want to do is get the frame powder coated along with the battery box and the swing arm. That'll be about a week's turnaround. Once they come back, obviously in that week I can't restore the rest of the bike. I can't get things made, get things chromed, rebuild the wheels and so on, but that doesn't matter because I can refit those parts and then come back later on once it's on its wheels and, you know, sort of restore those parts individually. So this morning then, it's now, let's see, 8:30. It's sunny, it's dry, which is good because I'm about to strip down this bike to its bare frame in the next 2 or 3 hours. There's a wiring loom off. Thank God for that. Really tight. Not want to come out here. We got there in the end. It's no fun getting old. Come on, lad. Yes! Go for that! I think you put me back out doing that. Oh my phew! So I finally got the engine on a little trolley to push it in the garage, and that's me done for the day. And now here we are the next morning in my very, very crowded garage. So I've got the frame in front of me, here's the engine on my little trolley, wheels here, all the small stuff's in a big storage box in front of me. So yeah, not a lot of room left. And this is why I've got to move quickly, because at some point in the next sort of, 6 to 8 weeks, my Mark II's coming back, and there'll be nowhere to put it, so I've got to move quite quickly. It's also very windy yesterday, so that's why there's parts of the video where it's very quiet. I've got to turn down the sound way down, because otherwise all you hear is the wind going and of course all the noise from the neighbours doing the gardening and so on. But we got it done. I started about 8:30 in the morning, and with some tea breaks and lunch break and so on, I finished about 4 o'clock. It took a lot longer than I expected, but then again, I should really expect to have issues because I'm doing it on my own, and there's always nuts and bolts that seize. I had a couple of small bolts that snapped on the engine. That's not really a problem, we can sort that out. But yeah, it wasn't too bad in the end. So today then, I've got to try and get the swing arm out of the frame, remove anything I've forgotten like the horn, I can see it from here, and the steering head lock and so on, and get it all prepped, ready to go to Triple S in the morning. And so we'll carry on this video when I've got a bit more work done. And now here we are, it's the next day, and I'm just back from Bingley in West Yorkshire, where I took the frame and battery box and so on to get powder coated. They have about a 1 week to 10 days turnaround, so I've got a lot to do between now and when I go and pick up the frame. So in this box here, I've got all the parts I took off the bike that I still need to go through and work out what to do with them. Some need to be restored, some can be binned, and some need to be replaced. So here we've got the sprocket cover here that can be polished. I've got the, let's see, top yoke, that's got to be painted and so on. There's the bottom yoke, that's got to be painted. Got the clocks, rear lamp, electrics, all kinds of things. Got to go through all that and sort it out and paint them, polish them, replace them or whatever. Now, one part I did not take to Triple S was this, and this is a swing arm. Now normally that will get powder coated with the frame, but in this case I didn't take it, and there's a good reason for that. First of all, it's in very good condition, there's no heavy rust on it, you know, no great problems, but I will paint it myself. I'll give it a few coats of etched primer followed by a few coats of smooth hammerite black, and it gives a very good tough finish. But that's not the reason why I didn't take it, no. When I checked inside the bearings here, they're in perfect condition, fully greased, not a problem at all, and obviously the bike's only done 12,000 miles. So, what's that got to do with it? Well, when you take things to be powder coated, they don't like to leave bearings in place because the bearings contain grease and oil, and even if you block it off as best you can, when the part is in the oven being baked, when the powder coat is being baked on, that heats everything up and the grease oil can leak out and ruin the finish on the piece. So they don't like having bearings in the pieces. So therefore you've got to knock them out, and when you knock them out you'll destroy them, and that means buying brand new bearings, which I thought was a real waste because these bearings are absolutely immaculate and it saves a lot of grief and expense if I can leave them in, and that's why I didn't take it. My job is to clean up these parts, get them painted and prepped, ready for when the frame comes back and we can get the engine back in the frame. And talking about the engine, it's behind me here, and that's also going to be cleaned up in the next week or so. All new fasteners, I'll get the cam cover vapor blasted and polish up all the case covers. The covers, by the way, are all in excellent condition apart from one, which is the points cover, which has got some deep damage there, some gravel rash on it that I need to get rid of with some wet and dry sandpaper and a lot of elbow grease. So again, that's something I've got to do, and I'm going to start all that work right now today. It's actually a bit cold today for painting, but I can get all the prep work done and then we can paint perhaps on a slightly warmer day later on this week. And so here we have some of the brackets on the bike, and of course the top yoke drying off in the sunshine after I clean them and prep them for paint. However, the lower yoke isn't so simple. And so here is that lower yoke and its stem. As you can see, it's pretty battered, and being steel, it's also pretty rusty. So it needs to be painted. Before then, of course, I've got to remove this worn out lower race, and that's always a problem. They're always difficult to remove. So what I'm going to do is take it to Jeff's workshop, where he's got a 10-ton press and all the appropriate gear to press this race off without any drama. Then I can paint the lower yoke, order some new races, and we're all done. And so next up is a swing arm. As you can see, I've already put this threaded bar through it with some big washers to protect the bearings inside from any paint and so on. So now I've got to rub it all down. It's actually not that bad. Clean it up and get it ready for paint. And so my next job is to remove all the old lacquer from the fork stanchions, which also includes, unfortunately, losing this sticker here which says New Jersey 1980, but there you go. So obviously corrosion's got underneath the lacquer. You can't really do anything about that apart from remove it all, get the lacquer off and polish up the fork stanchions. You could then, if you wanted to, re-lacquer it, but I don't bother doing that. I just keep it polished. To do that, I've got a brush in this little bottle. I've got some very powerful paint stripper, so hopefully this shouldn't take too long. And so with the clear lacquer stripped off the lower fork leg, you can see the corrosion that's eating away beneath the lacquer. So you've got to take it off to get that off. So now I'm going to tack this with some wet and dry sandpaper of various grades and then give it a final polish, and it should look pretty good. And next, as you can see, I've got a few things etch primed. I did that yesterday. So today things are starting to warm up a little bit, and so it's warm enough to spray the first coat of Hammerite Smooth Black. And now with the first coat done, I've got to wait half an hour before I can apply the second coat, then another half an hour for the third coat, and so on. And now here we are back in my garage, and I'm working on the points cover As you can see, it suffered some damage over the years, no doubt from the crash it had back in 1980 or so. So I'm just now rubbing it down with 60 grade wet and dry sandpaper, slowly removing all these deep scratches from the surface. And now I've just finished using 600 grade wet and dry sandpaper on this thing, and I'm winning because I've got rid of all the deep gouges that were all over the points cover. So soon it'll be time to polish this thing. That said, I've got one little mark there that I've not yet removed, and that's because it's quite deep, and to remove it will mean putting a flat in this area here, which I think would look even worse than just having a slight mark. So I've left that one. And now, as you can see, I've got the points cover back on the engine, and I polished it using good old Autosol. It's not perfect, but it's a damn sight lot better than it was. And now here we are, it's next morning and a bit too cold for painting. So instead I'm going to get stuck into polishing these fork lowers. As you can see, they've got some damage. This one in particular has got a deep gouge in it, no doubt from the time it got crashed back in the early 80s. And that's all got to go. And now we've been rubbing down these fork legs for about an hour or so, and I'm getting really bored. So I think I'll have a break and go do something else instead. And now for something a bit different, because I'm getting bored polishing those fork lowers. So instead I'm going to take off this cam cover, because tonight I'll take it round to Matt, who lives around the corner from me. He's going to vape blast it for me. And hopefully we'll have it back here by the morning. And that's great, because I don't want to have the engine exposed to the elements, to the dirt in my garage, for any longer than necessary. And while I've got the cam cover off, I shall also check all the valve clearances. Hopefully, with such a low mileage engine, they should all be okay. Because if they're not, you've got to take the cams out to change the shims, which live underneath the buckets. And so I've now got all the bolts out the cam cover, and will it come off? It's quite sticky actually. I've got a rubber mallet here just to help it. Gently. Oh, there we go, that was easy enough. Here it comes. There we go. Unfortunately, of course, the gasket's broken, but never mind. You get a new one of those. Looks pretty good on the inside. No problems there. Looks like it's never been taken off actually. And there's the cam cover that's going to go to get vapor blasted. So in here we have 2 cams, 8 lobes, so we can check the clearances one by one and see what they are. So fingers crossed, they're going to be okay. And so if you've never measured the valve clearances before, don't panic, it's not that difficult. You've got 8 lobes here for the 8 valves, and they're all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So first thing you need to do is get a pen and paper so you can write down the numbers you find, the clearances you find per valve. You then need some kind of spanner or socket so you can turn the engine over. Now I'm taking the points cover off here so I can access the end of the crank and just spin it round like that. No problem, until perhaps this one here, this number 5, is now, the lobe is sticking up, and that's what you want. You want the sort of maximum distance between the cam lobe and the valve, or in this case the valve bucket, which means that's got to stick up. You don't want to do it when it's sort of down like that, because that's pressing on the bucket and there's no clearance at all. You do it like that when it's sticking up away from the bucket. So once you've done that, then looking at number 5 here, we use these things. So this is a feeler gauge, or feeler gauges, and they come with, you know, a whole range of thicknesses. It's like fingers, and they're all a different thickness. It's all stamped on each of these. So you say, right, I've no idea what I'm looking for, but this one here is 0.005 an inch, or 0.127 of a millimetre. So all you do is you push it into the gap. If it fits easily, you know the gap is bigger than this, so you move on to the next one until it doesn't fit in, and then clearly the gap is between the one that doesn't fit in and the one that just does. It's sort of halfway, and that's the way you get your gaps. So this one here will go in, no problem. So I know it's thicker than that, so you go up to the next one is 0.006 of an inch, which is 0.152, and that one, that also goes in. So you keep going until one doesn't fit, and then you just go back a step, and that's the gap you're aiming for. And each of these valves will have a different gap, because over time the gap closes up. The valves are constantly hitting the underside of the head and hammering away, and that eats into the head. so the valve tends to lift up and close the gaps. You'd think it would actually open it out because it would wear, but no, it doesn't. It actually closes the gaps. So once you've done all that, hopefully, fingers crossed, all these are fine in tolerance, because there is a range of say from 0.03 to 0.04 or 5. You do have a tolerance there. If that's not the case, unfortunately, to change the gaps, you've got to remove the cams, remove the buckets, and change the shim that's underneath the bucket. Bit of a pain. The Z650 and the 750 are like this, but the bigger Zs, the Z1000, Z900, Z1s, they have the shim on top of the bucket, which is much easier to change, but it's more likely to get spat out if you're doing some sort of performance tuning on the bike. So that's it. So let me carry on now and measure all these different clearances, and we'll see what the numbers say, whether these are okay or they all need changing. And now I just finished checking all 8 valve clearances, and of the 8, 2 are okay and 6 are a little bit under. Not by a lot, but by a little bit. And that's kind of to be expected, because this engine's done 12,000 miles, and I suspect it's not been serviced since probably the first one it did back in 1977. And you're supposed to check the valve clearances every 6,000 miles, so it's probably missed one of those. And what's happened is, of course, the valve clearances have closed up slightly as the valves have worn in the head. None of them are, really way out. They should, by the way, be 0.15 of a millimetre, and these are all sort of 0.135, 0.14, 0.145. Not really enough to warrant taking the cams out and replacing all the shims. They're not that bad yet. So I'll leave it for the time being, but I've got my notes here as to the actual valve clearances, and at some point in the future, when I've done some miles on the bike, I will have to take the cams out and re-shim the valves. And so I've still got a lot of work to do with the aluminium parts on the bike. As you can see, I'm making progress with the painted parts. So here we've got some engine mounts, the rear lamp mount, top yoke, and of course the swing arm, and they've all come out pretty well. I gave them several coats of etched primer, followed by several coats of black smooth hammerite. Let it dry between each coat, and it turned out pretty well. It's quite a tough finish. It actually looks like powder coat if you do it thick enough. Hang on, a bit windy here. I've also done the lower yoke, but that's currently drying off in the back of the house where it's warm, so you can't see that yet. I did take the lower yoke and stem to Jeff's workshop the other day, where within 30 seconds he got one of his pullers and pulled off that old bearing race that was stuck on the stem, so that's no problem. I've now ordered an awful lot of new parts, including new races and so on for the stem, so that shouldn't be a problem when we start to rebuild the bike. So I'm now on day 7 of the first week of my build, and I'm hopeful that tomorrow or the next day I should be getting a phone call from Triple S over in Bingley to tell me the frame's now ready for collection. At that point I'll go and get it, and we can have some fun trying to rebuild the bike and refit the engine to the frame without scratching all that beautiful new powder coat. But that'll be for part 3 of the build, because I think this video is now quite long enough. So I think that's about it for now. So as I say, in part 3 we'll get the frame back from Triple S, we'll get the engine back in the frame, and actually the engine's looking a lot better now. I've got some new parts fitted to it, some new fasteners, got the cam cover blasted, so yeah, it's looking a bit better than it did. But you'll see all that in part 3, and so for now, thanks for watching and cheers.